The United States has stepped up its resistance to CCP infiltration and is concerned about the dangers of the CCP's firewall. On September 28th, U.S. Undersecretary of State Keith Krach posted a video on Twitter calling on Xi Jinping to tear down China's Great Firewall. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan, in front of the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin, called for the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall, which has separated West and East Berlin since 1961.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
More than 30 years later, the Undersecretary of State, Keith Krach, standing next to the statue of President Reagan at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, said the same thing to the Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping.
The Berlin Wall is gone, but a new digital wall has emerged. The Great Firewall of China. The Great Firewall of China separates the Chinese people from the free world, just as the Berlin Wall separated the German people from each other. Mr. Xi, tear down China's Great Firewall.
Jiang Jian, an observer of China in the United States, said that Krach speaking to Xi Jinping in such a special place delivers an important message.
The
U.S. government has clearly separated the CCP from the Chinese people. So how can the Chinese people know the evil nature and brutality of the CCP? Overthrowing the firewall created by the CCP is bound to be one of the urgent tasks for the U.S. government in the future.
Jin Chun, a former engineer at the Huawei Nanjing Research Institute, pointed out that the firewall built by the CCP is far more harmful than the Berlin Wall.
This firewall is the most evil wall. A person gets to know the world through all kinds of means. Because of the existence of this firewall, it could be said that all the ways through which Chinese people understand the world have been distorted by the CCP. Outside this wall is the real world, and inside is the world of lies. This is something that has never happened in human history.
The Chinese Communist Party's firewall has turned China into a local area network, which is not news to the world. However, the CCP virus broke out in Wuhan at the beginning of this year. The Chinese Communist Party covered up the truth of the epidemic by blocking information and suppressing speech, which eventually led to the spread of the CCP virus worldwide. In addition, the CCP is also trying to implement firewall and big data monitoring to other countries in the world. Krach had previously criticized the firewall for allowing data to flow in but not out, and let propaganda flow out but not let the truth in. Krach is not the only U.S. official who has proposed to overthrow the CCP's firewall. On June 1st of this year, the Conservative Action Project, a public platform formed by many conservative leaders, published an article co-signed by many political and business celebrities, experts, and activists. The article pointed out China has weaponized its internet into a system of mass surveillance, effectively turning it into a repressive information and mind control system. Breaking through these firewalls will be of critical importance. They called on Secretary of State Pompeo, granted to him by Congress in Section 7050 of the State Department's Appropriations Act, to partner with the private sector to develop technologies and initiatives aimed at cracking China's firewall. At present, some private organizations have developed some successful tools to help people drill holes in the CCP's firewall, such as Siphon and ACI. The GreatFire.org organization launched App Maker, designed specifically to escape CCP's internet control. In addition, Falun Gong practitioners also developed the FreeGate app in unbounded browsers. VOA reported in August that U.S. government agencies and some other private organizations are stepping up their efforts to develop new internet anti-censorship tools to cross the CCP's firewall, promoting safe and online access and information sharing. Jin Chun said that it is technically feasible to bring down the CCP's firewall.
Of course it is possible. The U.S. not only masters technologies such as the root server of the internet, but also has the ability to develop various wall-breaking technologies. The United States is also actively developing space-based technologies such as Starlink, which can physically bypass the CCP's firewall and show the truth to Chinese people.
Jin Chun also pointed out that many Chinese who came overseas and were no longer trapped by the firewall are still ideologically imprisoned. Therefore, they also need to tear down the wall that the CCP has built in their hearts. Kratch's video resonated with many netizens on Twitter, and they left messages saying, "Thank you for speaking out for the Chinese. Act immediately to defeat the CCP."
Chinese diplomats have worked for years behind the scenes to pressure U.S. state and local officials into adopting policies friendly to Beijing. But this issue has only recently gained national attention as the Trump administration raises the alarm on the communist regime's influence activities across the country. In a September 23rd speech at the Wisconsin state capitol, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that the Chinese Communist Party's covert influence operations targeting state and local politicians have been in full swing for years and increasing in intensity. He cited one example of a California state senator who in 2017 sought to introduce a measure denouncing the CCP's persecution of the spiritual group Falun Gong. The Chinese consulate in San Francisco then initiated a campaign to scuttle the resolution, writing letters of protest to the state legislature. Pompeo said, "Unfortunately, the California State Senate bowed to the CCP pressure campaign and shelved the proposed bill." The then state lawmaker Joel Anderson, who was behind the resolution, said in an interview that such placating was outrageous and deeply disappointing. Anderson left office in 2018 and is currently running for San Diego County Board of Supervisors, a 5-member county legislature. When people saw that one letter and a phone call had such a chilling effect on my colleagues, it begged the question why. Why would they be so tied to the Chinese consulate? Why is it so important for them to not offend and put a blind eye to atrocities? Adherents of Falun Gong have faced brutal persecution in China since 1999. Falun Gong is a traditional meditation practice featuring slow-moving exercises and moral teachings, centered around truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. U.S.-based Falun Dafa Information Center estimates that millions have been detained and hundreds of thousands tortured. Disturbing evidence has continued to surface about the regime's state-sanctioned practice of killing adherents and selling their organs for transplant surgery. As a symbolic stance to condemn the uncompromising courage of Falun Gong practitioners and condemn any government-sanctioned persecution against them, the resolution passed unanimously through the state's Judiciary Committee on August 29, 2017, but was blocked just 2 days later after an unsigned letter from the Chinese consulate reached every member of the state Senate. The U.S. House of Representatives, along with multiple state legislatures such as Minnesota, Arizona, Missouri, Illinois, and Colorado, have passed similar resolutions. Framing the bill as anti-China and anti-human, the consulate letter claimed that it may deeply damage the cooperative relations between the state of California and China and seriously hurt the feelings of Chinese people. Anderson called the letter stunning. He said it was very forceful. It told them that people would be held accountable who moved forward with it. According to Anderson, a phone chase ensued, whereby the consulate called up senators to make sure they saw the letter. Days later, the former senator denounced the threats at a rally in front of the Chinese consulate. During the last week of the Senate session, he also made at least 18 attempts to bring the resolution to a floor vote, in the hopes that people would come around to their senses. At one point during a speech on the Senate floor, he called on his colleagues to look around the gallery, which was seated with victims and relatives who fled China due to the persecution, and appealed to them to look in their faces. He said it was a chilling moment. "I just thought for people who say they care about stopping atrocities, standing up for innocent lives, for always being for the underdog, I was deeply disappointed." He added, "To think that California or any U.S. legislator would be influenced or intimidated by the Chinese government is scary. We should feel confident in our own country to call out atrocities when we see them." He further pointed to the hypocrisy of politicians who were quick to call people out for not being quote-unquote woke on social justice issues, but refrained from speaking up in the face of such atrocities. An email inquiry to Kevin De Leon wasn't immediately returned. De Leon was the then president pro tempore for the California State Senate, and now a Democratic member-elect of the Los Angeles City Council. Anderson, who hadn't had a chance to speak with De Leon about the issue, had learned from several senators new to the legislature at the time that they were acting on orders from leadership to vote against it, he said. He said they felt pressured, they weren't sure what was expected of them, and they weren't confident enough to be their own person. In hindsight, I know that they have regrets. The threat letter is but one facet of the Chinese regime's influence operations over the years. Most recently, a New York City police officer was arrested on suspicion of spying under the directives of Chinese consular officials. And in March, the Chinese consulate in Chicago twice emailed Wisconsin State Senator Roger Roth, asking him to pass a resolution drafted by the consulate to praise Beijing's leadership in containing the CCP virus outbreak. Roth, in response, introduced a resolution laying out point by point how Beijing has been lying to the world and covered up the outbreak. The regime has blacklisted Anderson and called him a terrorist over the letter he drafted to Chinese officials in 2008, urging the release of a San Diego Falun Gong practitioner detained in China. Anderson, however, vowed to continue advocating for China's human rights whenever possible. He said, "This is a tipping point in history. People of good nature have to stand for those being persecuted. Otherwise, this world is going to fail."
Amidst the U.S. government's crackdown on the CCP, overseas Chinese launched a campaign in August called Global Campaign to Remove the Five-Star Bloody Flag. Recently, when the American-Chinese Chamber of Commerce celebrated the 71st anniversary of the CCP's National Day, although the event was held on a small balcony, many Chinese activists arrived to protest and shouted anti-communist slogans. Zhou Yonghong, Deputy Consul General of Chinese Consulate in San Francisco, and Zhang Fuming, Chairman of the American Chinese Chamber of Commerce, ACCC, held a ceremony and raised the CCP flag to celebrate the CCP's National Day on September 26th in San Francisco on the balcony of the ACCC building. On the street below, protesters held banners such as "No National Day, Only National Death," and shouted these slogans to resist the ceremony.
中国华商总会，请拆除你的 banner， 不要庆祝中华人民共和国成立71周年，因为这是一个邪恶的政权，他们杀了很多中国人，然后在全世界传播病毒。
Hu Jinwei, a volunteer for the human rights group Humanitarian China, explained that protesters decided to join when they read the news about the event from Xingtao Daily.
我周围很多身边的人都是。
Many of my friends and acquaintances are true patriots. However, we are being suppressed by the CCP because we disagree with what the CCP does and have raised our voices. When we read this news, we decided to organize those who truly love China to come here to protest. This five-star flag does not represent the Chinese people. It only represents the CCP.
Veteran journalists Chen Kai explained what protesters mean by not a national day for celebration, but a national day of mourning.
The so-called National Day on October 1st, it was the sacrifice of many Chinese people that led to the establishment of the CCP government in 1949. After the CCP seized power, more than 80 million people died of starvation and persecution. This has surpassed the sum of Hitler's persecution and the death toll of World War II and World War I combined. Of course, the CCP's National Day is China's National Day of mourning.
The pro-CCP overseas Chinese groups in San Francisco used to raise the flag at the Chinese consuls in Garden Corner Square in the past years, but this year they moved to a small balcony of the ACCC building.
Maybe they had heard about our plan to protest beforehand and decided to move from Garden Corner Square to this balcony where they raised the flag. However, we protesters shouted at them, rebuking them seriously. Their flag raising did not go smoothly either. When they live-streamed the event online, in order to lower the voice of protesters, they had to lower their voices too, so the sound effects were very poor.
The protest in San Francisco is part of the global campaign to remove the CCP's bloody flag, a campaign initiated by Chinese in San Francisco in August. Hu Jinwei said that activists like him come to Garden Corner to distribute flyers every weekend from August to September. Some Chinese commerce groups have already removed the five-star flags from their buildings.
看到有挂5星血旗的那些商户或者是
These groups that raise the five-star flags are either merchants or Chinese fellow townsmen associations or other Chinese organizations. We distribute flyers to all of them. Our slogan is that we will persevere until all bloody flags are removed. The United States is the land of freedom of speech. The CCP has used American freedom of speech to penetrate into the United States and seduced many Chinese here with money. We hope that these merchants will soon liberate themselves from the CCP's evil claws.
Chiang Kai pointed out that the pro-CCP overseas Chinese associates hanging the five-star flag is, in essence, opposing the democratic system in the United States and opposing mankind's universal values, especially since the CCP virus is ravaging the world, causing over 200,000 deaths and millions of infected cases in the United States.
Now the CCP virus has killed so many Americans, yet they are still hanging the five-star bloody flag. The virus not just killed many Americans, both white and black Americans, it also killed many Chinese nationals. The Chinatown in San Francisco has suspended all its businesses and many become jobless. If they continue to hang the CCP flag, it is obviously inappropriate, right?
The U.S. government is resisting CCP infiltration with unprecedented efforts, investigating United Front organizations, CCP agents, and spies. Hu Jinwei said that all Chinese living in the United States should learn to see through the CCP as soon as possible.
I think that every Chinese, whether you support the CCP or oppose the CCP, you are one of the targets of the CCP's persecution. No one knows when it will be your turn. The world has discarded communism into the trash can. However, China still regards it as a treasure. This is absurd. Only when each of us stand up against this regime can we protect ourselves and future generations from communism.
Chiang Kai said that their next plan is to prevent the San Francisco city government from raising the five-star bloody flag on October 1st every year. According to Hu Jinwei, Chinese activists in Los Angeles and Seattle have also begun the global campaign to remove the five-star bloody flag.
The world scientists still do not have a complete...
The US ambassador to the United Nations, Kelly Craft, has voiced support for Taiwan to be included in the United Nations system. On September the 29th, Craft said in a virtual Global Cooperation and Training Framework, GCTF, the world needs Taiwan's full participation in the United Nations system, particularly with respect to matters that affect public health and economic development. A United Nations without Taiwan's full participation is cheating the world, Craft added. Taiwan deserves the highest platform where it can share its remarkable innovation and expertise in data science, in medical technology, and in cutting-edge communications. The United States and Taiwan established the GCTF in June 2015, using it as a platform for Taiwan to share its expertise with partners around the world. Japan joined the platform in 2019. Taiwan lost its seat at the United Nations to China after the world body passed UN Resolution 2758 in 1971. 8 years later, in January 1979, the United States ended its diplomatic ties with Taiwan in favour of Beijing, which considers the island a part of its territory despite its self-ruled status with its own democratically elected government. Washington has since maintained a non-diplomatic relationship with Taipei based on the Taipei Relations Act, TRA, signed into law by former President Jimmy Carter in April 1979. The TRA authorizes the United States to provide the island with military equipment for its self-defense and set up a non-profit corporation called the American Institute in Taiwan, which is now the de facto US embassy on the island. Over 100 officials and experts from over 20 countries took part in the GCTF event, including AIT Director William Brent Christensen, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, and Akira Yokoshi, Deputy Representative of the Japan-Taiwan Exchange Association's Taipei office. The GCTF event took place while UN members were holding the general debate of the 75th session of the General Assembly, which began on September the 22nd. Kraft added, Taiwan has a trusted friend in President Donald J. Trump and an administration that champions the international role that Taiwan holds. Washington and Taiwan relations have warmed considerably under the Trump administration, which sees Taiwan as an important ally in its Indo-Pacific strategy. Two senior US officials have visited Taiwan in the past 2 months, Heath and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar and Undersecretary of State Keith Krach. The US ambassador also criticized the Chinese regime for making every effort to suppress Taiwan's international profile, actions that she said were undertaken out of fear of a free and open society. Kraft pointed to the current pandemic as another reason why Taiwan should participate in the UN. She explained that Beijing blocked Taipei's attempt to warn the world that COVID-19 spreads from human-to-human contact. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the Chinese Communist Party CCP virus, commonly known as the novel coronavirus. Taiwan officials said they warned the World Health Organization that the virus could be contagious in an email on December the 31st. According to internal government documents, Beijing knew of the virus potential to spread among humans, but did not publicly acknowledge it until January the 20th. On January the 21st, both Taiwan and the United States reported their first confirmed COVID-19 cases. Kraft also applauded Taiwan's public-private partnership for ramping up local mask production capacity from about 2 million to nearly 20 million daily, key to Taiwan's success in containing the spread of the virus, she said. As of press time, Taiwan had 514 COVID-19 cases with 7 deaths. And since April, Taiwan has donated more than 50 million masks to countries around the world. On September the 30th, using her Twitter account, Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen thanked Kraft for recognizing Taiwan's contributions to public health and economic development and supporting our inclusion in the UN system. Tsai added, "We know that with greater international participation, we can do even more for the world." 12 of Taiwan's diplomatic allies, including Belize, Eswatini and Nicaragua, publicly called for Taiwan's inclusion in the UN system during the UN General Debate.
Shortly after Beijing held a ceremony to honor the heroes in the fight against COVID-19, a number of Chinese cities reported new confirmed cases. Yunnan province announced that the province has entered a wartime state and quickly built a makeshift hospital. Guangzhou authorities also announced that in preparation for the upcoming pandemic control in fall and winter, at least 20 makeshift hospitals are ready for coronavirus patients, providing more than 10,000 hospital beds. Because the CCP has habitually concealed real information, analysts believe that the actual situation in Guangzhou might be quite serious. On September 28th, the Information Office of the Guangzhou Municipal Government held a press conference announcing that the city will get makeshift hospitals ready for the following months. City-level makeshift hospitals will have 1,000 beds, and district-level hospitals will have 300 to 500 beds. 3 large-scale sports venues, along with exhibition halls, have been chosen as the sites of these hospitals. At the same time, in accordance with the unified national deployment, Guangzhou is in the process of standardizing construction in Grade 2 hospitals and above, covering a total of 108 fever outpatient clinics and 197 fever clinics. The renovation project was set to be completed at the end of September, and the new construction project was to be completed by the end of December. A netizen posted a video saying that there are numerous foreseeable crises in China. Now that the government has begun to prepare makeshift hospitals, it's time for commoners to save cash and stock up on food. Mr. Liu, a Guangzhou resident, told NTD TV that the authorities have been controlling the pandemic through its routine methods of controlling society, the practice of maintaining social stability, and mass surveillance.
The CCP is well versed in the so-called maintaining social stability, and its surveillance system is very powerful. Whoever is found to have contracted the virus, the authorities would find out his travel history in the past 10 days, and all those who had been to these places would be taken to a hotel to be quarantined. Only those who test negative after 15 days would be released. Those whose tests came out abnormal would then be treated in isolation.
Cheng Peng, a US-based commentator on political and economic issues, said that the real pandemic figures in Guangzhou have probably become very serious. There are 11 districts in Guangzhou, and based on the authorities' statement, each district will have 2 makeshift hospitals. Therefore, the entire city will have at least 22 makeshift hospitals, with tens of thousands of hospital beds.
The authorities reported themselves that more than 8,000 hospital beds can be readily available in times of emergency. This so-called emergency bed should be beds prepared for overflowing patients from regular hospitals, so the total number of beds should be more than 20,000, which means that the authorities are anticipating a big outbreak.
Guangdong province reported 0 new domestic cases on September 28th. There were only 11 asymptomatic imported patients in the province. 7 of them were in Guangzhou.
We need to consider 2 things in our analysis. One is that the CCP often underreports the coronavirus numbers. The other is asymptomatic patients who test positive often develop symptoms at a later stage. According to China's medical expert Sheng Wanghong, asymptomatic patients account for 80% of the total number. We therefore believe that many cases have emerged in Guangzhou recently.
Zhang Wenhong is a doctor in the infectious disease department of Shanghai's Huashan Hospital. On September 20th, he said in a public event that a second wave in winter is inevitable in China. He also pointed out that 80% of the patients don't have any symptoms, which is a frightening issue. The novel coronavirus is so contagious and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Zhang expected that it would take at least a year for the world to resume normal operations. China's COVID-19 medical advisor, Zhang Nanshan, made a similar statement on September 18th, saying that the pandemic will continue into winter and next spring. In addition to Guangzhou, Beijing, Qingdao, Dalian, Shanghai, Chengdu, and Harbin also reported new cases in the past several days. A Twitter user exposed online that one of Shanghai's quarantine hotels was in a densely populated community. He questioned whether it was appropriate. On September 29th, Chengdu Health Commission announced that there were 3 newly confirmed cases in Chengdu on the 28th, and 875 close contacts in the city are currently in quarantine. Shanxi Health Commission reported that there were 3 newly confirmed cases in Shanxi on September 28th and 1 asymptomatic case. In addition, after the emergence of new cases in Ruli, Yunnan province in mid-September, the city was locked down on September 14th and a makeshift hospital was completed within 1 day. On September 19th, the entire Yunnan province entered a wartime state to fight against the coronavirus. The CCP attributed all the new cases to overseas imports. Coupled with the CCP's strict censorship of news, the epidemic data published in various places is considered to be seriously smaller than actual numbers. China will have its 8-day national holiday from October 1st to 8th. The city's Tourism Research Institute estimates that 550 million people will travel domestically during the holiday, and its railway group estimates that more than 100 million people will choose travel via the railway. Many are worried that when tourists mingle at tourist sites, the pandemic will get worse in various cities across China.
We need to take into account the CCP's habit of lying. It is reluctant to reveal the true information to the Chinese people. I therefore suggest to the Chinese citizens to make full preparations for the next outbreak, such as stocking up on daily necessities and taking more preventative measures. Very likely there will be more citywide lockdowns or other major happenings in the future, which will cause a great deal of inconvenience.
Chinese universities resumed school in September, and almost all universities have been under closed-off management. In several universities, students shouted together inside the dorm to protest, demanding that the school authorities grant them more freedom. Students at Guangzhou Institute of Technology told the Epoch Times that trash is piling up around their dorm buildings, and the convenience stores and cafeteria on campus have been hiking up their food prices.